I never thought I'd get caught staring at someone like that. Someone who could make the world feel both impossibly heavy and achingly light in the same heartbeat. She was sitting across from me at the tiny cafe table, her coffee untouched, the faintest crease at the corner of her mouth hinting at a smile she hadn't yet allowed herself. I cleared my throat, hoping she wouldn't notice how my hands trembled just slightly as I reached for my cup. She laughed softly at something I said, but it wasn't the laugh of polite amusement. It was warm, quiet, and entirely impossible to ignore. Her name was Claire, mid-40s, her hair streaked with silver that somehow made her look younger, sharper, more present than anyone else I'd ever met. And here I was, 23, still fumbling through my own life like a half-read book, sitting across from her as if the universe had staged this collision. I could see the careful way she held herself, slightly angled away from me, shoulders taut, but her eyes kept finding mine anyway. "Honestly," she said, tilting her head, "you're in over your head." I laughed, a little too loudly, but the words lingered in the air, a tease and a challenge all at once. My chest tightened, the kind of flutter you get when you know someone knows more about you than they should, but they don't scold you for it. Her gaze softened just a fraction, and I felt the weight of that softness as if it were a touch I wasn't allowed to have. It wasn't like I was stupid. Well, not entirely. I'd seen her before at the little bookstore around the corner, her hand lingering on the spines of old poetry collections, a quiet reverence in her movements. I'd watched from a distance, thought about what it would be like to speak to her, to let her know I noticed the small ways she carried herself. And now, here I was, sitting so close I could see the tiny scar near her wrist, the one she'd probably hoped no one would ever notice. She leaned back, crossing her arms loosely, but there was a hesitance in her posture, a slight fidget of her ring finger that betrayed a curiosity she wouldn't admit. I wanted to reach across the table, to brush my thumb over that finger as if I could read her thoughts through the skin. Instead, I forced myself to look down at my coffee, trying not to let my fascination show. The cafe was quiet, a soft hum of background music and distant footsteps outside, but it felt like a bubble around us. Time stretched, and every small glance, every subtle tilt of her head, became amplified. I was aware of the faint scent of her perfume, a mix of lavender and something else I couldn't name, the way the sunlight caught the edges of her hair, turning the silver strands into threads of gold. "You seem different from the others," I said finally, my voice low, careful. She smiled then, that half-smile that made my stomach knot and my chest ache simultaneously. "Is that supposed to be flattering?" "It is," I admitted, because I couldn't stop myself. And the truth was, I'd been walking on the edges of her world for months, unsure if I was welcome, or if I'd ruin it just by stepping closer. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locking with mine, and for a moment, everything paused. The cafe, the city outside, my own frantic thoughts, they all dissolved into the quiet gravity between us. Then the sudden chime of a doorbell jolted me from the fragile bubble, and we both glanced toward the sound. A visitor? A delivery? Or perhaps someone who would remind her she wasn't meant to linger in this stolen, precarious moment with me? I swallowed hard, realizing I wasn't ready for her to disappear yet. And she, Claire, let her gaze linger on me just a second longer than necessary. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew, without a doubt, that I wanted to find out. I watched Claire push her untouched latte aside, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup almost absently, and I wondered how much of herself she let the world see. She had this armor, subtle but unmistakable. I knew enough from the way she sometimes let her eyes drift to the floor, to the tiny pause before she answered a question, that she'd been hurt before. Not just casual heartbreak, something deeper, maybe betrayal. Her laugh in the cafe earlier hadn't been carefree. It had been cautious, testing me. For my part, I tried to steady my racing thoughts. I'd fallen into a habit of comparing myself to the life she must have already built. Mid-20s, a little aimless, a lot impulsive, and here she was, a woman who had survived disappointments I could barely imagine, who carried herself like she'd learned to stand in the center of her own storms. Yet, she smiled at me. She noticed me. And the thought made me tremble, like I'd been standing in the cold too long, and suddenly someone handed me warmth. "You're not like anyone I usually meet," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. She didn't look at me directly, but I felt the weight of her words like a glance pressed into my chest. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I was drawn to her, because she was untouchable in all the right ways, and maybe because I was too young, too inexperienced to fully understand why it mattered, but I didn't. I swallowed, letting the words lodge somewhere deep where they couldn't escape. There was a risk here. I didn't need to think hard to see it. Her life was complicated, divorced, experienced, cautious. Mine barely started. And yet, the gap didn't shrink the pull, it made it sharper. Age, experience, unspoken histories, all made the attraction feel both inevitable and forbidden. I could sense her hesitation, the way her eyes flicked toward the cafe door as if expecting someone else, someone more appropriate, to walk in. I wanted to ask if she'd been happy before, if someone had left her feeling small. But I didn't. I was too aware that my questions might crack open doors I wasn't ready to explore. So instead, I let silence settle over us. Thick but not unpleasant, a kind of shared secret that didn't need words. Then she did something small, almost imperceptible. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for the sugar jar, and we both froze. The touch lasted less than a second, but it sent a shiver up my arm, a pulse that neither of us tried to disguise. I could feel the hesitation in her fingers, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us could, or should, ignore what was happening. For a moment, the cafe vanished. There was only that fleeting, electric contact, the taste of coffee lingering, sunlight spilling across the table, and the unspoken possibility that we were both teetering on a line we weren't supposed to cross. Her eyes met mine again, and I swear I could see her past and her present tangled together in that look. Fear and curiosity and longing all folded into one. And for the first time, I realized she might be just as aware of me as I was of her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something neither of us could fully name. I thought I could ignore it. I thought a brush of fingers, a shared smile, a quiet afternoon in a cafe could exist in isolation. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing stays private for long. Claire laughed at something I said, light, unguarded, but then her expression tightened when the cafe door swung open. I followed her gaze and froze. Her ex-husband was there, not glaring, not immediately noticing us, but the shadow of familiarity in his stance, the easy command of someone used to being in her orbit, made my stomach turn. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to pretend I wasn't here, but my fingers were still near hers on the sugar jar. The moment stretched, silent and urgent, and I could feel Claire stiffen beside me, her body pulling slightly away, just enough to speak volumes. I think I need to," she started, voice tight, but I didn't let her finish. I didn't know why I said it, but my hand lingered a fraction longer on hers. "I'll leave if you want," I murmured, though my heart was already pounding at the proximity, the risk, the impossible pull I felt. She looked at me like I'd just offered something dangerous, something thrilling, something neither of us should admit wanting. The briefest pause, a hesitation I could almost taste, before she shook her head. "No," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not yet." And just like that, the tension wrapped itself around us tighter. I caught a glimpse of him, the ex, ordering coffee, talking casually to the barista, completely unaware of the silent storm between us. But awareness lingered. I knew he'd notice sooner or later, and then everything we were skirting dangerously close to would explode. I wanted to lean in, to close the space between us, but my brain screamed warnings. Age, history, consequences, all screaming in unison. Still, every instinct in my body, every unspoken longing, pulled me closer. Claire brushed a stray hair from her face, fingers lingering near my hand again, and I swallowed hard. The warmth of her skin against mine was dangerous, intoxicating. We weren't supposed to do this. We weren't supposed to linger in the quiet, forbidden intimacy of a cafe table. And yet, we were. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for life to tell you to stop?" I asked quietly, hoping the words didn't betray everything. She hesitated. "Every day," she admitted, eyes flicking toward the door again, then back to me. And there it was, the vulnerability, the crack in her carefully built walls, just enough for me to see the woman beneath, the woman who could be mine if only we survived this. The tension between us hung, thick and palpable, until the barista called out a name, someone else's name, and Claire's ex glanced up. Our hands, still inches apart, twitched slightly, almost meeting, almost forbidden, and I felt my chest tighten. Every instinct screamed to pull back. Every nerve demanded I lean in. And then the moment broke. Not fully, but enough to leave us both aching, wondering if the next second might be the one we couldn't resist. The room felt smaller than it had any right to be. Claire's living room, warm lamplight spilling across bookshelves, and the faint scent of vanilla and cedar should have been comforting. Instead, it pressed down on me, each shadow a reminder of how impossible this was. She was on the sofa, legs tucked beneath her, eyes fixed on a photo frame of her teenage daughter. I could see the love in her gaze, but also a trace of sorrow, as if the memories themselves were both soft and sharp. My own chest ached, knowing I had no claim to the life she'd lived, no part in the memories that shaped her. And yet, I wanted to be there, wanted to be allowed to step closer. "I shouldn't," I began, my voice trembling despite my attempt at calm. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered near the edge of the cushion, brushing absent-mindedly against the fabric. "I know," she said finally, low, almost like a whisper meant for herself. The words were both a warning and an invitation, and I felt it in my bones. I wanted to step forward, to close the space between us, but something held me back. The age gap, the shadows of her past, the ghost of her ex-husband who still lingered in her life. All of it screamed caution. And then jealousy struck like a punch to the gut. Her daughter's photo, her careful distance, even the idea of someone else she might let in. I realized I wanted more than just moments. I wanted all of her attention, all of her focus, even if it was impossible. And I hated myself for wanting it. "I can't stop thinking about you," I blurted, the words raw, unpolished, leaving my lips before reason could intervene. Her head jerked up, eyes widening slightly, and my stomach lurched. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she leaned back, biting her lip, her expression a storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. "You're reckless," she said finally, almost laughing, almost scolding, but not really. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying a vulnerability she usually hid. And yet, she paused, letting the sentence hang between us, unfinished. I stepped closer, drawn to her in spite of every warning bell in my head. "And yet," I asked, voice barely above a whisper, feeling like I was about to cross a line I might never come back from. Her gaze dropped, a shadow crossing her features. Then she looked up again, eyes locking with mine in a way that made my knees feel weak. There was something unspoken in that glance, a confession waiting to spill, a desire that mirrored my own, dangerous and exhilarating. The air between us was taut, electric, filled with all the things we weren't supposed to say, all the impulses we weren't supposed to act on. My hand twitched, itching to reach for hers, to finally close the distance, too, and then the door creaked. Just a faint, almost imperceptible sound, but enough to jolt us both. Our hands froze, separated by inches, breaths catching in the sudden awareness that someone, or something, was about to intrude on the fragile bubble we'd created. We stared at each other, a silent question hanging in the space, the world narrowing down to the room, to the tension, to the almost touch that neither of us could resist. The knock was soft, polite, almost hesitant, but it shattered the fragile tension between us. Claire froze, her hand hovering in midair as if the world itself had stopped moving. "Mom? Are you home?" A voice called from the other side of the door. Her daughter. I hadn't realized she was back from her weekend visit. My stomach twisted, guilt and panic colliding in an instant. I stepped back, heart hammering, feeling both exposed and painfully alive. Claire's face shifted, eyes wide, jaw tight, and I could see her calculating, weighing options too fast for me to follow. I'm just finishing up some work, she said, voice calm but brittle. Too brittle. I wanted to say something, to explain myself, to tell her this wasn't what it looked like, but the words caught in my throat. I felt like a trespasser, though she hadn't pushed me out yet. The moment stretched, thick and suffocating, until the door creaked open and her daughter stepped in, backpack slung over one shoulder, cheerful and oblivious. "Hey, Mom," she said, glancing between us. Her eyes flicked to me, and I felt an instant awkwardness, a heat rising to my ears. Claire's hand gripped my arm briefly, a silent warning, or maybe reassurance, but the pressure didn't last long. She forced a smile, crouched slightly to greet her daughter, and my stomach sank at the reality pressing in. We weren't just a pair of adults dancing around forbidden attraction anymore. Someone else existed in her life, someone who made this impossible to navigate without consequences. I could see it in her eyes, the fleeting panic, the guilt, the worry that her choices might hurt her daughter, even unintentionally. And then it hit me. Her ex-husband's coffee order earlier, the way he'd lingered in the cafe, the faint sense of someone watching. What if he had seen more than I thought? What if he knew, or at least suspected, and this delicate balance we'd built could collapse with a single misstep? I wanted to pull back, to protect her, to shield us both from the inevitable fallout. But my body refused. My eyes kept finding hers, and in that look, I saw a daring spark, the part of her that wanted, desperately, to see where this could go, even if it was reckless. Her daughter bounded over to her, chatting about school projects and weekend adventures, and Claire's smile was warm, motherly, perfect, but her eyes flicked to mine once, a tiny flash of something unsaid, a promise or a warning I couldn't read yet. I wanted to reach for her, to brush a strand of hair behind her ear, to let her know that whatever chaos was coming, I wasn't going anywhere. And I sensed she wanted the same. But the sound of her daughter's laughter, the reality of her world intersecting with ours, pressed down on us both. For a brief, electric moment, we stood on the edge of everything we'd been holding back, our hands almost brushing, our breaths mingling, hearts thrumming in unison. And then, reality intruded again, sharp and unavoidable, reminding us that desire and safety rarely coexisted. We weren't safe. Not from her past, not from the world, not from each other. And maybe that was exactly what made this impossible pull so irresistible. The apartment felt impossibly small, every shadow, every piece of furniture pressing in as if the walls themselves were aware of what was about to happen. Claire leaned against the counter, coffee forgotten, eyes tracing some invisible point on the floor. I stood near the doorway, chest tight, aware of every heartbeat, every shallow breath. "I can't keep doing this," she said finally, voice low, trembling. "Not like this. Not with everything." I stepped closer, drawn by the gravity in her tone. "Everything?" I asked, careful. "You mean your past? Your life?" She shook her head. "No, you don't get it. I mean us. This." Her hand hovered near mine, hesitating, almost afraid. "It's reckless. It's dangerous." But her words stopped as her eyes met mine, and suddenly the quiet weight between us exploded into something tangible. I saw everything she'd been holding in her gaze: longing, fear, guilt, desire. And for the first time, I understood that she wasn't trying to push me away. She was testing if I would stay anyway. "I don't care," I said before thinking, voice hoarse. "I don't care about the risk. I want you." Her lips parted slightly, and her hand brushed mine in that tentative, electric way that had haunted me since the cafe. My pulse jumped, every nerve alive, as I inched closer. We didn't speak. Words would have ruined it. But the space between us shrank until it felt like the entire world had collapsed into that small apartment. She laughed softly, almost a whisper, a sound that was both nervous and incredulous. "You're ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. And I could see it. The walls she'd built around herself, cracking just enough for me to see in. Her hand lingered on mine, thumb brushing my knuckles, and I felt a jolt, the kind of connection that made time bend, slowed and magnified in the most exquisite way. I wanted to close the gap entirely, to let the words, the touches, the unsaid confessions spill over, but life, past choices, and consequences still hovered in the corners of the room. She swallowed, eyes glistening, and took a step back, just enough to give herself space. "If we do this," she started, voice catching, "we can't pretend it's simple." "I know," I said, heart hammering. "It won't be, but I'll deal with it. With everything." The honesty hung between us, raw and unpolished, and I saw the tiniest flicker of surrender in her expression. The tension broke in a way that left us both trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. We were here, truly, undeniably, despite all the risks. For a moment, we just stared, breaths mingling, hands almost touching, and the universe seemed to pause in acknowledgement. Then the faint creak of the apartment door, someone returning, a world intruding again, reminded us that this fragile bubble was temporary, fleeting. But in that fleeting moment, we had seen each other completely. Vulnerable, reckless, aching, and human. And that was enough. We didn't know what would happen next. But right then, in that quiet, impossible intimacy, I realized something irreversible. Whatever came, we had already crossed a line that neither of us could deny. The rain had started softly outside, tapping against the window in a quiet, steady rhythm. Claire and I sat on her sofa, coffee long forgotten, hands finally intertwined without hesitation. The city beyond the glass blurred in the gray light, and for the first time, everything felt still, not fragile, not urgent, just alive. She laughed softly, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face, eyes warm despite the storm outside. "You really are impossible," she said, shaking her head with that familiar, teasing smile. But there was no scolding in her tone, only acceptance, the kind that had taken months to earn and seconds to confirm. I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of all the unspoken words, the near misses, the fear and longing we'd carried like a shared secret. "And yet, here we are," I whispered. Her eyes met mine, searching, cautious still, but there was a flicker of something daring, something real. "Here we are," she echoed. And in those 4 words, I felt the slow unraveling of all the walls we had built around ourselves. The age gap, the past, the risks, they didn't vanish. They would always be part of us, part of the story we'd stumbled into. But somehow, it didn't matter. The weight of those obstacles paled against the clarity of what had drawn us together. Desire, yes, but also understanding, recognition, and, perhaps most dangerous of all, trust. We didn't need to speak of the past anymore. I knew her scars, the ones hidden beneath laughter and careful smiles. She knew my uncertainty, my impatience, the youthful impulsiveness that had nearly ruined everything. And still, we had chosen each other, messy, human, imperfect. A clap of thunder rolled across the city, and she flinched, then laughed, leaning into me. I draped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close, feeling the steady warmth of her body against mine. For a moment, the world narrowed to the rhythm of our breathing, to the faint scent of rain mixed with her perfume, to the silent acknowledgement that we were exactly where we were supposed to be, even if the future remained unwritten. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we never met?" she asked quietly, eyes tracing the lines of my face like she was memorizing something fleeting. "All the time," I admitted. "And I can't imagine it. Not now." She smiled, a quiet, soft curve of lips that held hope, humor, and relief all at once. "Good," she said, "because I can't either." Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the streets clean, but inside, the apartment felt warm, safe, and impossibly full of possibility. We didn't know what the next day, the next month, or the next year would bring. There were no guarantees, only choices. And we had made ours. I brushed a kiss against her temple, just enough to promise presence without rushing anything. And as she rested her head on my shoulder, I realized that life, complicated, messy, and often terrifying, had a way of bringing the right people to the right place at the right time, if only you were willing to take the leap. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?